Since thinking is not illegal yet, we want to get information to those who want to be aware and do not want to get lulled to sleep during these challenging social times. I'm sure you often sit around and contemplate, like what is really going on. Well, if you cannot connect the dots, then you cannot see the image. So this presentation is part of the Revolution 101 series we will conduct at the Melanin Institute of Human Technology. Since thinking is not illegal yet, we want to get information to those who want to be aware and do not want to get lulled to sleep during these challenging social times. So, the title is really coming from a book by Robert Whitaker called Anatomy of an Epidemic. But the topics presented here are not the same as in Whitaker's book. But still, it's revealing how he talks about magic bullets, psychiatric drugs, and the astonishing rise of mental illness in America. This is significant because we know that we are living in a medical, pharmaceutical, industrial complex, and drugs are what are driving things. And so we have a population that's drugged out, and as I've written in one article called Sucker Punch Pamphlet, how pretty much our pre-existing conditions and all the drugs over the years have weakened our immune systems, and that's why we're succumbing so much to these, I guess you could say, external viruses. We're going to break that down as we talk about global destruction. But some people don't actually believe there's anything going on. They just think that, hey, a virus is out there, like with AIDS, you bring monkey bit somebody, we all have AIDS. With this coronavirus, from some pangolin to bat, and then we eat the bat bite us, whatever, and then the world got this coronavirus. But if you just think about this cartoon right here, and they got these chickens in the coop, and one group saying, look, I'm telling you, they're eating us. They're contemplating. The other one says, look, you and your conspiracy theories. Others just laughing at them. Okay? Well, we're not talking conspiracy theories here. We're just presenting you with information. So the reality is most people are not too interested in information. I like to use this one example of in The Matrix. If I can get you to hear what Cypher says about ignorance.
I know this steak doesn't exist.
Saying the steak doesn't exist.
I know that when I put it in my mouth, juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realized? Ignorance is bliss.
So I hope you were able to hear that, but he was just saying that after 9 years of dealing with trying to be out of the matrix, as he took the right pill to kind of observe things, he knows that that steak is not real, but he likes it, and guess what? Ignorance is bliss. And that's what many people are. So we have a society that is concerned about the type of information that gets disseminated. So we have our deceased researcher named Howard Zinn wrote a book called A People's History of the United States. Saying, why would somebody want a book like this to be banned? Well, as I started to look at the issue of global destruction and weapons and lies, he has a segment in there about the impossible victory of Vietnam. We could fast forward that to say the impossible victory with Afghanistan. But there's a component in there where he talks about what happened in Vietnam. In early August 1964, President Johnson used a murky set of events in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam to launch full-scale war on Vietnam. Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara told the American public there was an attack by North Vietnamese torpedo troops on American destroyers, quote, while on routine patrol in the international waters, unquote. McNamara said, quote, the U.S. destroyer Maddox underwent an unprovoked attack. It later turned out that the Gulf of Tonkin episode was a fake, that the highest American officials had lied to the public, just as they had in the invasion of Cuba under Kennedy. In fact, the CIA had engaged in multiple operations like this. So when I read that and started putting in perspective all the other scenarios where we've been lied to, and then people, you tell a lie long enough, it's bound to become the truth. So the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, 1960s, was a lie. You think about September 11th, 2011, with the World Trade Center being attacked. That was a mirage. I mean, just for some ragtag folks to be able to hijack a plane and now fly into a building, not once but twice. And now that changed the whole scope of how we view things, and now you set the stage in the world for war. So then we have these decades-long escapades in Afghanistan, and it ended in 2021 as a lie. Why do we say lie? Because we've been told for so many times and over the years in the media, oh, progress is being made, oh, government's being established, oh, all these things, and you leave in 2021 and it all collapsed. AIDS and denial of gain-of-function research is a lie. So AIDS was around for a long time, and you will have a little read of documented evidence showing that this was a concocted viral agent to decimate populations. So when we say gain of function, we know that through the Tuskegee experiment, they were studying syphilis. Well, that's like 40 years. You don't just do studies for 40 years and not have any data. So AIDS is, has been around for a while, but we have no vaccine for AIDS. So now we come along with this COVID-19 from this coronavirus. And I say it's like the Game of Thrones is still being revealed, because we get new information every day about what's going on with the different types of vaccines that are all over the world. Now new drugs that are coming out in 2021. And so it's like, what next? Well, I think what next will be is a financial crisis, an economic collapse. So with this global destruction and using chemical biological warfare, I find it interesting that we had this brother named Timothy Cunningham, who was actually found dead in the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta. Who is Timothy Cunningham? Well, the story is Cunningham was reported missing from his Northwest Atlanta home in February 2018. Just over 7 weeks later, his body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River. An autopsy determined Cunningham drowned, but the case remained open for weeks, while investigators worked to determine if the drowning was accidental. So how did Cunningham, who knew how to swim, end up dead in the Chattahoochee River? So we may never be able to tell you how he got into the river, to the Atlanta police major. Of course, the data's out there and saying that, oh, this is conspiracy, saying that he had some knowledge and he had some interest in immunization, viruses, and vaccines. So he may have, because he's working for the CDC. But when you look at the breakdown, brothers don't really just commit suicide like this. So beyond Morehouse College, Cunningham, who has 2 advanced degrees from Harvard University, studied the health differences between people from various backgrounds, including race, gender, geography, and class. According to his biography, which you see, they say on the website, Cunningham has also been deployed to help during public health emergencies, including Superstorm Sandy and the Ebola and Zika viruses, his biography says. Now, the brother was studying several things. I mean, if you look at my CV is like 20 pages long. There's several things I've studied. I studied tetrahydropipervirilene and its effects without ethanol. I studied oxytocin vasopressin. I've studied adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone. I studied cholecystokinin. So all that stuff is on my CV. Even the techniques I've used, patch clamp studies, stereotactic surgery, immunocytochemistry. So you can pick and choose from my CV to say, oh, he knew this particular type of data, or he didn't study this particular data. This is not on there. Well, he worked for the CDC, and he studied racial disparities in age-specific mortality among blacks or African Americans. So he had a concern about black people. He had a concern about us. There were reports, and since I can't talk to him, and since I don't have his documentation, but he was making references to, these immunizations and how dangerous they can be. So if he's saying that, and there's many doctors that talk about that, his area, he was a PsyD, he wasn't a medical doctor. The point is he did research. So in his research, he was probably revealing a whole lot of stuff. But for him to just die, death was later ruled by suicide by drowning after toxicology report from the medical examiner said he had marijuana and nicotine in his body. Okay, maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. The Sex Chronicles. At the time of his death, he was a team leader in the epidemiology and surveillance branch of the CDC's Division of Population Health. Cunningham had struggled with his sexual identity, and in 2010 had a breakdown. So this is the reports coming from the news. A friend said that Tim talked to her about his feelings toward men and that he didn't consider himself gay. So basically, for presenting like he had some conflicts, he was doing drugs. So these are the reasons why he wasn't committed suicide, just jumped in the river. Okay. All right, but we know about CDC and that you heard about Atlanta child murders? They've got this one black guy in jail named Wayne Williams saying that he killed all them kids. Well, not really. They say he killed some adults, but they wouldn't link him to all the other kids. That happened here. That happened at the CDC environment in terms of Atlanta, in terms of this jurisdiction. So we certainly don't want to just say that there's nothing going on. You have to connect the dots to see what's happening. So when we go back in time, connect dots, here's a 2009 article from Newsweek talking about fear and the flu. This was when the swine flu was out. And it breaks us down way before this SARS-CoV-2 hit. So when we say way before, we can go even back further to the 1970s. And look at this. This is the Department of Defense Appropriations. So when you see the word DARPA, DARPA actually stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And if you see in the this so-called top secret document, Department of Army Advanced Research Project Agency. Back there in the 70s, they called it the Defense Research and Engineering. So they had different names, but today it's known as DARPA. Well, listen to this. Within a period of 5 to 10 years, this is now coming from the report dealing with synthetic agents. Within a period of 5 to 10 years, it would be possible to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist, and for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. Again, written around the 1970 era. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make a new infected microorganism, which could differ in certain important aspects from any known disease-causing organisms. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease. Now look at this. A research program to explore the feasibility of this could be completed in approximately 5 years at a total cost of $10 million. Now look, it is highly controversial issue, so somebody's questioning this. It's like looking at the reports at the hearings. And there are many who believe such research should not be undertaken, lest it lead to yet another method of massive killing of large populations. You can bury your head if you want to, but people have been doing things with their research, and that research is not necessarily for your longevity to live on this planet. So we have these questionable deaths of these African presidents and prime ministers that spoke against the COVID narrative and opposed the WHO demands, World Health Organization. All dead from heart problems, ages 52 to 61. Okay, and 3 of them in 3 months. So these are brothers from Tanzania, Ivory Coast, Eswatini, and Burundi. And I believe you heard what happened in Haiti with Jovenel Moïse, but he wasn't a heart attack. They actually just shot him. So we say shoot. You can shoot somebody. Well, look at this. This is like talking about weapons that can be used to give you a heart attack. let's see if I can play this for you. So there are silent weapons that are used, and I'm not saying this happened to those African leaders, but it is quite interesting that they all had heart attacks. They weren't really ill. So let's see what the CDC.
Seemed to mimic a heart attack that would kill someone, but it would appear that they had a heart attack. I did find such a thing.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
The poison was frozen into some sort of dart, and then it was shot at very high speed into the person. So when it reached the person, it would melt inside them, and the only thing would be like one little tiny red dot on their body, which was hard to detect. There wouldn't be a needle left or anything like that in the person.
But also the toxin itself would not appear in the autopsy?
Yes, so that there was no way of perceiving that the target was him.
Okay, so I can show it to you. You can see it, and you still won't believe it. Why? Because that's how propaganda works. Oh, no one would ever do that to you. So a secret weapon used for assassination shoots a small poison dart to cause a heart attack, as explained in this congressional testimony. The dart from the secret CIA weapon can penetrate clothing and leave nothing but a tiny red dot on the skin. On penetration of the deadly dart, the individual targeted for assassination may feel as if bitten by a mosquito, or they may not feel anything at all. The poisonous dart completely disintegrates upon entering the target. The lethal poison then rapidly enters the bloodstream, causing a heart attack. Once the damage is done, the poison denatures quickly, so that in the autopsy is very unlikely to detect that the heart attack resulted from anything other than natural causes. So I read it to you, I showed it to you. I mean, how much more? Well, again, some people just don't believe it because ignorance is bliss. So, to look at some scholars and researchers that I certainly would respect, Boyd Graves, who's no longer here, the brother was at the forefront of exposing the AIDS research. We'll talk briefly about him, but these are all people that you can go research on your own. So Boyd Graves, as a lawyer, was talking about the legality of these offensive weapons against us. Francis Boyle, another lawyer who's talked about these weapons, chemical biological warfare weapons. Richard Fleming, Vladimir Zelenko, Peter McCullough, Shankara Shetty. These are all notable doctors that do not get any publicity from the mainstream media, how they're treating people for COVID-19. So I'm just saying, look, here are the names. You can do the research on your own. For the Boyd Graves died in a questionable manner, because people don't know really what happened. But here he is sharing about the history of the development of AIDS. You can look at his website and explore information dealing with Boyd Graves. But again, the brother's at the forefront of telling you something's going on. And if you did not know, in the coronavirus, there is a attachment that has the human immunodeficiency virus linked to it. We won't need to go into that depth here, but I'm just recommending that you start reading alternative sources, not just the nightly news. So Harry Washington, his sister, wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, but she also wrote this book called Deadly Monopolies. Shocking information, because this is 2011. She wrote that book. She even mentions in there that affordable vaccines fulfill the needs of the pharmaceutical industry as well, which needs these new markets because it has been losing its blockbusters to patent cliffs. And in the developing world, its profits are further threatened by governments like those of Thailand and Brazil that exercise march-in powers to bypass pharmaceutical patents altogether and license generic versions of needed drugs. So the companies now have moved towards what? Vaccines, because that's what's going to make them money. So again, this is the shocking corporate takeover of life itself consequences for your health and our medical future. Now, this middle book here, Germany's Black Holocaust, probably never heard of it. It's happening in Namibia. In Namibia, that area of southwest Africa was colonized by the Germans. The Germans practiced the darn Holocaust on black people before they did it to the Jews. So this story has been told, but people aren't listening. I just find it fascinating because his brother wrote the book around 2003, but he talks about how about the Nazis, because they were the ones that were doing the research. And they were the ones doing the research. It says, in order to do all of this, the Nazis had to learn how to become acclimated to the stifling, oppressive African sun. So they literally squeezed the life out of black POWs in order to discover the high level of tolerance to the sun that was intrinsic to black skin. So of course, Germans, white people down there in Africa, they can't deal with the hot sun, so they want to study black people scientifically to see how they can now stay in the sun. We can now add, as Purple Car calls, the melanin marauders to the list of things the Nazis could be called. So they were doing experiments on black men to study how they could deal with the sun. Another powerful book you must get is called AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire by Nancy Turner Banks. Powerful sister. And that book was written back in 2010-11. So these are all books that came out way before this pandemic we're dealing with right now. She has a component in here that says, people of the late 20th and early 21st century have literally been bathed in a sea of toxic soup from conception until death. And so it is understandable that a toxic factor for political and economic reasons was quickly dismissed in favor of a viral hypothesis in the 1980s when young men began to show up with damaged immune systems. And we're talking about AIDS here. Examining toxic stressors causing immune system breakdown would inevitably lead to questions about the corporate takeover of the American state and the consequences of policies that allow long-term pollution, vaccines, and drugs, both legal and illegal, to be dumped into the bodies of our already stressed out children. Again, must reads, because these are way before this pandemic. Other must reads. Jim Marrs has several books, one of them called Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Again, he even has a section in there on vaccines. A Higher Form of Killing by Harrison Paxson. The Secret Story of Chemical Biology Warfare. I mean, you can bury your head if you want to, acting like nothing's going on, but people have written on this for decades. This book, Nazi Doctors, kind of hard to find. I wonder why. But it's talking about how German or these Nazi doctors came all over to America and incorporated some of their research. And while they were doing their research, of course, they started talking about using weapons like chemicals to control populations. So none of this is new. It's just the propaganda of you not knowing about it. So basically, you're going to have good propaganda and bad propaganda. Propaganda is just a way to influence people's thinking. And that's why this pandemic is so challenging for people to get through, because they don't know who not to believe. You watch the nightly news, you're going to be in trouble. So, managing public opinion, corporations and propaganda. There was a researcher named Alex Carey. He, in Australia, was kind of describing this, way that corporations control, manipulate, and he was an expert in dealing with propaganda. He died in 1987, but he dealt with war, and today he didn't deal with vaccines, but I'm just telling you how we can look at his words. And so let me play a little something for you about one segment about this issue of propaganda.
Meantime, in Europe, where a similar progressive period was not cut off by a propaganda assault on public opinion, a different result ensued. Charles Forsyth observes that after World War I in Great Britain and elsewhere, liberal parties gave way to labor or social democratic groups. In the United States, by contrast, politics moved in the opposite direction, and the socialists during the 20s virtually disappeared, while liberals were reduced to an ineffective few. During the 1920s, American intellectuals, reflecting on wartime and post-war experience, believed that democracy had reached a crisis. The manufacture of consent was supposed to have died out with the appearance of democracy. Walter Lippmann wrote in 1922 that it has not died out. It has, in fact, improved enormously in technique. Under the impact of propaganda, he concluded, it is no longer possible to believe in the original dogma of democracy, i.e., that it necessarily reflects the popular will in any significant way. Reviewing the experience of World War I, Harold Laswell, the leading American student of propaganda for the next 50 years, reached similar conclusions in 1927.
With the decline of the authority of crown, church, and social class, and the rise of egalitarianism generally, propaganda had become the principal method of social control. If the mass will be free of chains of iron, it must accept chains of silver. If it will not love, honor, and obey, it must not expect to escape seduction.
It's a very subtle thing, but on the other hand, not so subtle thing going on. They're talking about a major new Northern Industrial Caucasian alliance, very similar to the one that they were talking about prior to World War II. But it was in that case, Germany was going to be the one dominating that, and of course a fight broke out between the Caucasian nations as to who was really going to control this Northern Industrial Alliance. And of course, over this fight, the Soviets withdrew. And they said, no, we'll represent the Aboriginal peoples. That we'll try to organize them on a new economic level, a completely different economic theory. And of course, that's what this war has been about. This Cold War for 45 years to spend them into the ground. And then along comes Gorbachev. And along comes Gorbachev. And Gorbachev says, look, we're not going to do this anymore. He basically abandons that entire perspective. And he says, look, we're going to join together with you. We're like you. Look at us. We're like you, you know, and he parades around with his wife and stuff around around the Western countries. Look, we're just like you. And those of us who are just like you want to join together with you. And so now what they're really looking at is in 1992, at the European Economic Summit Conference, they're planning to invite both George Bush and President Gorbachev and invite them to come to the summit conference to join together to have the entire new alliance struck. That's the new world order, and to have it under the international banking system so that loans will be given on an international banking system level to Eastern Europe to reconstruct all of their heavy industry, to reestablish major heavy industry in the Soviet Union so that they can build cars, refrigerators, stoves, appliances, televisions, all the things that they've been missing out on for the last 45 years. They'll only have to pay the workers $5, $10 a day, because that's more money than they ever hoped to see. That'll give them enough to buy at least those minimum appliances. They'll be able to produce these at massively lower costs for the American industry to get in there on these joint business ventures. And, of course, they're going to need access to the strategic raw materials. And so what they're going to do is they're going to turn their collective Caucasian eyes to the south, to all of the Aboriginal peoples of the Southern Hemisphere. And they're going to say, well, these are kind of Aboriginal peoples anyhow, and we can all understand why they aren't really responsible for making responsible judgments about those resources and having them used to the best advantage of us. And so therefore, they're going to need to have a covert system to be able to not only destabilize third world leaders who refuse to go along with that type of privileged access, but also to root out and to destabilize and to destroy any indigenous citizens organizations in those third world countries that might want to rise up and establish a different relationship with their own resources. And, of course, any third world leader who stands against them, then they're going to need the more tactical level operations. Then you're going to need the tanks and the guns and the aircraft and the Delta forces and that kind of thing to go in, as we did in Panama and, you know, as we did just now, to be able to show that kind of overwhelming traditional World War II tactical warfighting ability. But still, their major weapon is the logistical covert warfare. And what we've seen here now that's what we see from the papers. And so what they did is they began by May and June of 1990. Now this is still months before any of the things with Saddam Hussein have happened. What they've done is we have seen by the November 1989 meeting papers that they have entered into this covert operation against Saddam Hussein, And we see now in the papers being exchanged in the Pentagon that they actually began to discuss Iraq as a classical candidate to be able to demonstrate why it's going to be necessary to maintain the massive military spending. But they have to have some kind of threat. They have to have some kind of demonstration model to the American public as to why it's necessary to not take the money away from the military. And they actually go so far as to name Iraq as a threat to potential oil supplies. And then we see them move the drilling equipment up. We see the confrontation with Saddam Hussein. We see the people in Kuwait communicating to their neighbors, such as Jordan, that they've already got it set up, that the Americans are going to come in. But what are the Americans being told? What are the people in the United States being told?
Just 10 years ago on the African continent, our people were colonized. They were suffering all forms of colonization, oppression, exploitation, degradation, humiliation, discrimination, and every other kind of agent. And in a short time, they have gained more independence, more recognition, more respect as human beings than you and I have. And you and I live in a country which is supposed to be the citadel of education, freedom, justice, democracy, and all of those other pretty sounding words.
We have to have the type of understanding of Africa and the type of understanding of our people here in order to build a line of communication between the two. And once the lines of communication have been established, and our African brothers can stretch forth their hands and reach out, and we can stretch forth our hands and reach them, why there's nothing that this blue-eyed man in this country will be able to do to you and me successfully from that day onward. Today, for the first time, the black people of the West are beginning to look homeward, beginning to look back towards the other continents of Africa, and they're eating. We have a different skin color than the majority in this country. There's not to say if they sit in Washington and say it's okay to do this one because they're black or whatever. It just happens that they're willing to go in and brutalize people in countries of different racial groupings more readily than they are in England, for example, again, or Canada or Switzerland or wherever. And so you get back to the Persian Gulf War. And you ask yourself, does the CIA have anything to do with that? And the answer is absolutely. We're getting it out right now. This was published in the Houston Post, November 18, 1990. Charlie Reed, asked the CIA when we were in Saudi Arabia. He details how the CIA director, William Webster, went to visit with the Kuwaiti intelligence in November of 1989. I didn't know this, but I was outside saying they're going to engineer a war. They need one. He goes over and sets up a liaison with them to destabilize and attack Iraq, and hitting it hard through the economy. And it was already exhausted after the Iraq-Iran war, and its coffers were depleted and it was broken, and so they jimmied the price of oil so they couldn't pay back its debt, provoking it. Meanwhile, Kuwait had expanded its borders, so they actually expanded to take and tap into oil fields in the Mela oil fields that were in fact had belonged to Iraq. These are clear provocations. If you look at George Bush's explanations for his reasons of invading Panama, which were vaporous, about all you could come up with there was he didn't like Noriega. He said it was to restore democracy, so apply that to the Persian Gulf. We're defending Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. They don't even know what democracy means. They don't pretend to democracy. Not the slightest pretense to democracy. The oligarchies that control the oil in those countries are obviously heavily male-dominated, very repressive, no religious tolerance, no pretense of democracy, and yet this is the country that we're going in to pay such a high price in money, material, and human lives to defend. Again, George Bush's rationale, Panama had not attacked us, they had not crossed us, they were not waging economic war against us. To the contrary, we were attacking them economically. Kuwait definitely provoked Iraq. They cost them billions of dollars in oil revenues, and the CIA was working with Kuwait during that time as Saddam Hussein was. Now, this doesn't exonerate him. I don't say, okay, he was provoked, so it's okay that he attacked Kuwait. I don't like him at all, certainly not for attacking Kuwait.
and the other things that he's done, presuming that part of them are true, and they're not all fabrications of the propagandists that used to work for me when I was running a war campaign. I know for a fact that at least one of the major stories about their poison gassing the Kurds was a fabrication planted in the media by CIA propagandists. I ran into that in the Angola thing. It's mentioned in this book in kind of a funny way as it happened in our bureaucracy. I'm sure it wasn't funny in the repercussions. Nevertheless, he's not to exonerate Saddam Hussein, but he was given a red light, or green light, pardon me, to invade Kuwait. He was told that we had no defense contract, we had no defense agreement with Kuwait. He asked the U.S. ambassador, read this article, Ralph Schoenman, how the U.S. set up Iraq to invade Kuwait. He asked us how we felt about Kuwait. We knew damn well that there was tension there because we were helping to create the tension. Our ambassador, April Glaspie, told him we had no defense agreement with Kuwait. She didn't know he was tape recording the conversation. She said it 10 times. At one point she said the Secretary of State told me to emphasize the fact that we have no defense agreement with Kuwait. She said I talked to the President about this. And then Lee Hamilton, for example, in the Congress later, examining this evidence, said the U.S. clearly gave him a green light to invade. And then, plump, Bush jumped on it because he had the war, which again, I, from sitting way outside, have been able to predict that he was doing. Now, what I need to do, because we're definitely running out of time, and we definitely want to get into the questioning, and the subject is vast and vastly complex. I wish we had time to talk about the drug war, for example, which is a major scam with the effect of decimating the Bill of Rights in this country. I don't know if you read up on this or not. We can get into that in the question and answer if you'd like. But what I want to wrap up for you is an understanding of the simple formula of why, how, and why this stuff works as it does. Why would we go to war? Why would the CIA be funded to run 13,000 plus covert operations to destabilize other societies and kill 6 million people in countries like Nicaragua and the Tumba Mountains of the Congo that couldn't hurt us if they wanted to, and there's no evidence that they wanted to hurt us? Why would we gratuitously do these things? What is the point of brutalizing other societies? Even, is it just gratuitous viciousness? I don't know, vampires under the cover of dark and the secrecy of the U.S. government exercising a license to go out and suck blood from people and kill them?
And let the world see that Uncle Sam is guilty of violating the human rights of 22 million Afro-Americans and still has the audacity or the nerve to stand up and represent himself as the leader of the free world. Not only is he a crook, he's a hypocrite. There he is standing up in front of other people, Uncle Sam, with the blood of your and my mothers and fathers on his hands, with the blood dripping down his jaws like a bloody-jawed wolf. He still got the nerve to point his finger at other countries. You can't even get civil rights legislation. And this man has got the nerve to stand up and talk about South Africa, or talk about Nazi Germany, or talk about Portugal. No, and no more days like those.
George Bush is trying to pretend that his vision for the world order is just having the United Nations pass a resolution open debate, and then working requested by the United Nations as one of the multilateral forces to go in to defend international law. This is what he's pretending is the New World Order. It's completely in defiance of what the facts are here. The fact is, as you recall, immediately after the incursion on Thursday, August 2nd, the United Nations voted 13-0 in the Security Council to order him to remove his troops. And then 4 days later, they voted 14-0 to impose economic sanctions against him. They decided to follow a severe diplomatic course to remove his forces from that country. And George Bush did not listen to that, did not go along with that. No, he defied the United Nations. He unilaterally, with no consultation with Congress whatsoever, no consultation with the United Nations whatsoever, orders 250,000 United States military forces to run to Saudi Arabia. And he states publicly
that he is going to send these forces into Kuwait to militarily throw out Saddam Hussein, whether the United Nations supports him or not. He said that he was going to do this to effectuate vital American interests and to protect the American way of life. Now, for me to turn around then and try to tell you that really what he's doing is following a United Nations mandate is preposterous. It's an absolute bald-faced lie. But he thinks if he states it boldly enough, no one will quite remember that he stated just exactly the opposite and followed, of course, just exactly the opposite. Yeah. And then, of course, he announced to the United States Congress that he was going to send these troops in whether the United States Congress or not supported him, despite the fact that under Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, only the Congress of the United States has the authority to commit troops like that. And so what he does is he then sends in 250,000 more troops without any authorization from Congress whatsoever, transforming Operation Desert Shield into Operation Desert Storm. And he announces that if Saddam Hussein has not withdrawn his troops by January 15th, he's going to send the military forces in. That's exactly what he did.
So the Congress is faced at that point with a fait accompli.
So they said, well, you know, if he's going to do this anyhow, we better come together and authorize him to do this. You know?
22 million black victims of Americanism are waking up, and they're gaining a new political consciousness, becoming politically mature. And as they become, develop this political maturity, they're able to see the recent trends in these political elections. They see that the whites are so evenly divided that every time they vote, the race is so close, they have to go back and count the votes all over again. And this is which means that any block, any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who goes to the White House and who's staying in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You can keep Johnson in Washington, D.C., or you can send him back to his Texas cotton patch. I say again, you got a president who's nothing but a southern segregationist. In the state of Texas, they'll lynch you in Texas as quick as they'll lynch you in Mississippi. Only in Texas, they lynch you with a Texas accent. In Mississippi, they lynch you with a Mississippi accent. And the first thing the cracker does when he comes in power, he takes all the Negro leaders and invites them for a coffee. To show that he's all right. And those Uncle Tom kids hands up the coffee. People telling you and me that this man is all right. Because he's from the South. And since he's from the South, he can deal with the South. What about him? He's from the South. Make him the president. If Johnson is a good man because he's from Texas, and being from Texas will enable him to deal with the South, Eastman can deal with the South better than Johnson. You're getting misled. You're getting had. You're getting caught. I was in Washington a couple weeks ago. All the senators were still on it. And I noticed in the back of the Senate a huge map. And on this map, it showed the distribution of Negroes in America. And surprisingly, the same senators that were involved in the filibuster were from the states where there were the most Negroes. Why were they filibustering the civil rights legislation? Because the civil rights legislation is supposed to guarantee voting rights to Negroes in those states. And those senators from those states know that if the Negroes in those states can vote, those senators are bound to agree. green. The representatives of those states go down the green.